I'm starting a new series. We certainly aren't going to deal with it all tonight, but the Cape of Good Hope. Hope for the future. People ask, is there hope for the future? And is independence for the Cape viable? And what can we do to work for free and independence, the Cape of Good Hope? 5 months from now, we will be having municipal elections. That's very significant and important if we're interested in building a free and independent Cape of Good Hope. Is there hope for the Cape? We all know the refrain from the Exodus, let my people go. So Moses and Aaron came into Pharaoh and said to him, thus says the Lord God of the Israelites, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go that they may serve me. I don't know how many people recognize the fact that the state of Israel was a result of secession from Egypt. And I've had people come to me and say, yes, but where's the biblical basis for secession? Well, one of the most famous events in the Old Testament, the Exodus. The nation of Israel grew out of secession from Egypt. In the Bible, a nation is an ethno-linguistic people group of a shared faith. The scriptures make it clear that the Hebrews remained Hebrews. Even after 480 years in Egypt, they never became Egyptians. That's significant. Because today, the whole attitude is, well, a nation is a geographic accident. I mean, whoever happens to be there, even if they're diverse in religion, belief, worldview, culture, language, everything like that, that doesn't matter. And so they've mixed up the idea of what a nation is. But we are not geographic accidents, we're demographic descendants. In 1 Kings 12, we read of the secession of the 10 northern tribes from the United Kingdom of Israel. There were 3 kings of the United Kingdom of Israel. King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. That is the period of the United Kingdom. And that United Kingdom was divided when Solomon's son Rehoboam foolishly dismissed the wise counsel of the elders who had stood before his father Solomon. Instead, Rehoboam chose to rather listen to the irresponsible advice of the young men who had grown up with him. As a result, he arrogantly dismissed the petition of his subjects, and he threatened to tax them even heavier and burden them with even more oppressive laws than they'd ever experienced before. Now, Solomon could have justified some of his taxation. We need all this to build the temple. And the temple was magnificent. It was the most magnificent building in the world. And maybe there was some justification, sacrifice to build the temple. But once the temple was built, it's not like the taxes suddenly went down. Now it started going to opulence of the government. And now, after all they'd been taxed under Solomon, which was already grievous, they're told by his son Rehoboam, I'm going to tax you even worse. Now, when all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, saying, what share have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to your own house, O David. So Israel departed to their tents. So Israel has been rebelling against the house of David. There was none who followed in the house of David but the tribe of Judah only. And Benjamin actually did join him later. But the 10 northern tribes now became the northern kingdom of Israel, and the southern was called Judah. When King Rehoboam assembled 180,000 warriors to fight against the house of Israel to restore the United Kingdom, God stopped them, declaring this secession was of him. But the word of God came to Shemaiah, the man of God, the prophet, saying, speak to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, king of Judah, to all the house of Judah and Benjamin, and to the rest of the people, saying, thus says the Lord, you shall not go up, nor fight against your brethren, the children of Israel. It's pretty categorical. Let every man return to his house, for this thing is from me. What thing? The secession, the division, the ending of the United Kingdom, the creation of 2 kingdoms, northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Judah. This is of me. Therefore they obeyed the word of the Lord, and they turned back according to the word of the Lord. And instead of there being a civil war, there was a peaceful acceptance that this secession was God's will. Interesting. And so after that, Israel goes into the northern kingdom with the capital in Samaria, and the southern kingdom, Judah, with the capital in Jerusalem. The scripture emphasizes that all the families of the nations of the earth are to sing the praises of the Creator in every language and tongue. So Revelation 5 verse 9 says, and they sang a new song saying, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain. And you have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation. Now isn't it interesting? Here we are in heaven. And in heaven, there's still a distinction of every tribe, every language, every nation, every people. And yet the people here on earth who are trying to say that these distinctions don't matter. But these distinctions are significant enough to be mentioned in heaven as part of the glory of God, the diversity of the kingdoms that have submitted to Christ. A nation is an ethno-linguistic people group of a shared faith. Now I say that as a missiologist. This is basic missions 101. You can't just look at the map and say, oh, there's 222 countries in the world. We have a missionary in China, right, that's China. We have a missionary in India, good. Well, there's 1 billion people in India. There's 1,300 language groups in Indonesia. There are 480 language groups in Nigeria. There's 144 languages and tribes in Sudan. There's 50 different language groups in the Nuba Mountains, which is an area not even bigger than Scotland. So as missionaries, we have to think in terms of every ethno-linguistic people group. We can't just think in terms of countries. But unfortunately, many people take confused country. Country and nation is often used synonymously. But as a world Christian, as a missions-minded Christian, we need to be distinguishing between, that's a country, it's not a nation. So unfortunately, many today are confused, very confused, about the concept of nations. And this could be because there's a group of state representatives in New York calling themselves the United Nations. Now, they're neither united nor nations, but of course, most of them have absolutely no legitimacy at all. The United Nations is the largest collection of unelected dictators, mass murderers, drug traffickers, human traffickers on the planet. Most of them are actually just gangsters with flags and self-awarded medals, by the way. The United States deludes itself that it's one nation, under God, indivisible. Now, to say that America is under God would be a good commitment, but one nation, indivisible? Why 50 states in a voluntary union should be considered indivisible seems incomprehensible to most of us. Yet Americans are expected to make this pledge on a regular basis. And by the way, this pledge was brought in, I think, under the Eisenhower administration, 1950s. And one wonders why they suddenly needed to put the word indivisible in. Abraham Lincoln waged a ruinous war, the worst war in American history. More Americans died in the war between the states than Americans have died in every other war they fought combined. Over 650,000 people died to preserve the Union, which was meant to be a confederation. Since that war between the states, concluded in 1865, America has become more and more centralized, with central government overruling state governments on such matters as legalized abortion and state-mandated education. And I might say that there's an excellent film that's just been released this year, in April in America, Roe v. Wade, which we're planning to show in a preview for those who are interested at, it's going to be, I think, Tuesday the 8th of June. We're inviting pro-lifers who are interested in previewing it so that they can then help promote to get it into the cinemas in the country. So, how abortion was legalized in America is by a group of criminal deceivers, deceiving and lying and putting lie upon more lie. And in fact, this Roe v. Wade, which is told from the perspective of the person who is at the epicenter of it, the head of NARAL, the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Legislation, Dr. Bernard Nathanson, an abortionist who killed 70,000 babies as an abortionist, who organized the whole scam, admitted he lied about everything and sucked out of his thumb the statistics they were using on the evening news. And that it was known by the media that they were lying, but they were doing it for a good cause, they believed. And this was the central government telling all the local governments in America, 36 states in America had abortion as illegal, like Texas. And now the federal government came and said, you can't make laws protecting babies in your own state. Now that's a result of Lincoln. By the way, this picture is interesting. Do you recognize the character standing there? That's Fidel Castro, the cigar smoker himself. Uncle Fidel is coming here to lay a wreath on behalf of the Communist Party of Cuba before the idol of Lincoln in this temple. In this temple, as in the hearts of the people, for whom he saved the Union. The memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever. I mean, saved, hearts, forever, temple. Seriously, religious terminology here. But just reminding us of the fact that Abraham Lincoln is a patron saint of the Communist Party of the United States of America and of the Communist Party of Cuba and many other places too. He's much prized, and he was a correspondent and friend of Karl Marx, and they correspond. Karl Marx was very supportive in defending what Abraham Lincoln was doing because it totally fitted in with his goals. Anyway, that's another story for another day. But when the Soviet Union, the USSR, broke up in 1991, it was considered a good thing. And there was a lot of rejoicing as Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia and Ukraine and Belarus and Armenia and Georgia and many other nations seceded from the Union, the Soviet Union. It's a good thing for freedom that the Soviet Union was not indivisible, because there's a multiplicity of nations in what is now the Russian Federation and the 15 different republics that have grown out of it. Even National Geographic, speaking about the peoples of the Soviet Union, showed the different tribes and languages and races and nationalities. And you see they even had a tribe of astronauts living in the Soviet Union. And so now there's 15 countries where there used to be one indivisible Soviet Union. And that's a good thing. It's a very good thing. And Russia is the stronger for it, that it's not ruling a massive empire that includes all these countries like Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. Why not let them go free and separate? Some of the most successful countries in the world are the results of secession. Exhibit A, Switzerland, seceded from Austria in 1291. Now you all should know of the story of William Tell. Their independence was inspired by the expert marksmanship of William Tell, who was a real person. He refused to bow before the hat of Albert Gesler, which was raised on a pole in the market square of Altdorf. And when William Tell refused to humble himself in front of this leader, Gesler's cruel wrath mixed with curiosity to test William Tell's legendary marksmanship with his crossbow, ordered him to shoot an apple off his son's head with a crossbow bolt. I mean, what a disgusting, cruel punishment to any father. And yet, so good was William Tell with his crossbow that he could dare to do it, and he succeeded in splitting the apple with his arrow, saving the life of both his son and himself. And then Gesler asked, "Why have you ready 2 arrows?" Because after shooting the one, well, it's not an arrow, it's actually a bolt. Hence the term, you shot your bolt. Crossbow shoot bolts. And William Tell stated, "If I'd missed with the first, I would not have missed with the second in your own heart." And Gesler was enraged and considered that to be insubordination, sedition or something, and he is arrested and taken by boat across Lake Lucerne to Kuznach, where he would spend the rest of his life in a dungeon. Now, a fierce storm enabled William Tell to get close enough to the shore that he escaped, taking his crossbow with him, where he later ambushed and killed Gesler with an arrow. And this launched the young Confederacy Secession from Austrian rule. The first 3 cantons which formed the Swiss Confederation in 1291 were Schwyz, Uri, and Unterwalden. The oldest republic in the world, Switzerland, now consists of 26 cantons, sovereign, independent microstates. And when I hear friends of mine in America saying things like, "America's the oldest republic in the world," I say, "Have you not heard of Switzerland?" When I hear people saying, "America's the freest country that ever was or is in the world today," and I said, "You should visit Switzerland. They're a lot freer than you are." And there's a lot of things that the people in America seem to think that they're the oldest, the greatest, and all the rest. But interestingly enough, at the beginning of the First World War, the American military intelligence sent a major to do a study of Europe because they thought we might get involved in this war. And the report came back famously that the French army trained their riflemen at 40 yards range. The targets were 40 yards away from the rifleman. 40 yards. The English army trains at 100 yards. A lot better than French. The German army trains at 300 yards. The Swiss army trains at 400 yards. And he said, that's basically it. The Germans will beat the French and British easily, but nobody can beat the Swiss. I mean, that was just speaking in terms of plain musketry and soldiering skill. You can imagine, it's a whole lot easier to target 40 yards than it is at 400. And that's the difference between the French and the Swiss. That's a 1,000% difference in the distance you're expecting your marksman to aim at. Despite Switzerland occupying the crossroads of Germanic and Romish Europe, as reflected in their linguistic and cultural regions, they've got Germans, that's the majority, they've got French, they've got Italians, they've even got Romans. Its confederal, decentralized, direct democracy policy of armed neutrality enabled Switzerland to stay out of ruinous world wars, when all the countries around them were killing one another by the millions in the First and Second World War. Switzerland stayed an island of peace on a continent often torn apart by war, by decentralized government structure. Other successful secessions, think of Holland, Netherlands. A lot of people in South Africa came from Netherlands. Netherlands was a colony of Spain until just a few years before Jan van Riebeeck came to the Cape. Led by Prince William of Orange, the Netherlands seceded from Spain beginning in 1568. They finally won their freedom by 1648, just 4 years before Cape Town was founded. Another country that started from secession is the United States of America. The USA seceded from Great Britain in 1776, demanding their chartered rights as Englishmen under Magna Carta, the Great Charter of 1215. The 13 colonies constitute themselves as the United States of America, with the Declaration of Independence, 4th of July, 1776. Now, it should be noticed that right up till the war between the states, the United States of America always was described as the United States of America are. It's not the United States of America, it's the United States of America. The United States of America are. After Lincoln's victory, it became the United States of America is. It moved from a confederation to being a federal system where it's basically one centralized government, which is not the way the founders envisaged it. Well, going back to 1776, the founding fathers of the United States maintained that as the English government had failed to protect them and to provide for their rights, as guaranteed by Magna Carta of 1215, they were absolved of their allegiance to the British government in London. Now, this is all part of Lex Rex. The law is king, and In Defense of Liberty Against Tyrants by Junius Brutus, books that were well known and well quoted from at that time. As the king owes allegiance to the King of Kings, we owe allegiance to the king. But if the king is in rebellion to the King of Kings, we must not join him in his rebellion to God. Now, government is a contract. We give the government allegiance and taxes and service in the military and so on. They give us protection. Now, if the government fails to serve and to protect its citizens, the citizens are alleviated of any obligation of loyalty to government. If the government won't keep their side of the contract, then we don't need. For example, if you have to pay rates and taxes, then the government must fix the roads and see the electricity and the plumbing and everything works, and they've got to protect you from crime and all that. Now, if the government fails to do that, why are we paying our rates and taxes? And so you get tax revolts, and this is all part of the kind of principle which is spelled out in Magna Carta, Lex Rex, In Defense of Liberty Against Tyrants, and which the Americans asserted with their War of Independence against Great Britain in 1776 and following. Belgium seceded from Netherlands in 1830. Originally, Netherlands included what today is Belgium, which is why probably Afrikaans is so much closer to Vlaams, which is in Belgium, than Netherlands. And it could be that Afrikaans is more Afrika-Vlaams, because you go to Belgium today and you hear a person speaking Vlaams, you will be able to understand them and communicate with them quite well. A fair bit harder in Netherlands, although there's similarities. Texas seceded from Mexico in 1836. Remember the Alamo. The Battle of the Alamo in 1836 was a pivotal event in the War of Independence for Texas. and the cruelty and arbitrary lawlessness of President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. I've always found it amazing when you come across a spur in Cape Town called the Santa Anna Spur. Do they not know who Santa Anna was? He's not exactly the good guy. You know, you might as well have the Mountie Tin Spur or something. It's just, Santa Anna was bad, very bad. I mean, and here you've meant to have this Texan-like spur restaurant. You've got one called the Santa Anna. Well, this led to other Texans rising up and defeating the Mexican army at the Battle of San Jacinto, 21st April 1836, securing the independence of Texas from Mexico. So Texas seceded from Mexico, and they are the one state in the Union of the United States that made a provision as well when they joined expressly. They have the right to secede at any time, and a lot of them are thinking this is a good idea at the moment. Nicaragua seceded from Guatemala in 1838. Norway seceded from Sweden in 1905. I mean, it's a lifetime of my grandfather. It's not that long ago. In fact, very recently, there was Norway celebrating its 100th anniversary of their country, becoming an independent country. Prince Carl of Denmark was unanimously elected king by the Norwegian parliament, the first king of a fully independent Norway in over 500 years. He took the name of Haakon VII. Now, Haakon was one of the great Vikings who, therefore, many descendants, many other kings were named Haakon. A national referendum confirmed the people's preference for a monarchy over a republic, and a peaceful separation of Norway from Sweden was effected 7th of June 1905. Finland seceded from Russia in 1917. If you know your dates, you'll recognize something was going on in 1917. It was the Bolshevik Revolution that tore Russia apart, and the Finns set up their own parliament and declared themselves independent from Russia on the 6th of December 1917. They seceded from chaos and from communism. You will notice all the Viking countries have crosses in their flags. It's a testament to the conversion of the Vikings, that they, some of the most bloodthirsty people in the history of the world, how they were tamed and civilized by the gospel. The Republic of Ireland seceded from Great Britain in 1922. And it's a fact that Ireland today is divided between Northern, or Protestant Ireland, and Southern Republic of Ireland. Northern Ireland is monarchist, unionist, believe in being united to the United Kingdom, where Southern Ireland are Republican and they're Catholic. And so again, you've got a secession based on religion, probably primarily, in the fact that the Catholics in Ireland did not want to be part of a Protestant Britain. And the Protestants in Northern Ireland did not want to be part of a Catholic Southern Ireland Republic. And in fact, there were two secessions. Ireland seceded from Britain, and Britain was happy to give the whole of Ireland, north as well, away. And the Northern Irish Protestants had to fight to stay in the Union. I mean, that's a strange form of civil war, but they were fighting Britain to stay in the Union, just as Southern Ireland was fighting to get out of it. So they both seceded in different ways. The whole of Ireland seceded from Britain, and in Northern Ireland seceded from Southern Ireland to stay part of Britain. Pakistan seceded from India in 1947. As the British started to leave India, millions of people migrated. The Muslims moved to Pakistan, and Hindus moved out of Pakistan into India, and millions died in the wars of that secession. That was a very bloody mess, literally. One of the worst secessions in history. Very badly done. Very sloppily and badly executed indeed. Well, Bangladesh, which was East Pakistan, later seceded from West Pakistan, which is now understood as Pakistan. And you could imagine it's not really workable. You had the Muslims grouped in Pakistan East and Pakistan West, and now you've got Bangladesh separate from Pakistan. Taiwan, this island off the coast of mainland China, seceded from China in 1949. As the communists seized control of mainland China, the nationalists seceded from mainland China. Now, not that mainland China accepts it, and right now there's a lot of bullying and attempts to pressure them, but right now Taiwan is one of the richest, most effective free market economies in the world. In fact, our mission has had many a Bible printed in Taiwan because they print them cheaper, more effectively, and so on, then we can get done in Africa at 1/5 the price. Singapore, which is also a place we've regularly got Bibles printed because they can undercut everyone else in cost, they seceded from Malaysia in 1965. Now, Singapore was just a swamp. Malaya became independent in 1957 from Britain, became Malaysia when it incorporated Sarawak and Sabah, but then Singapore peacefully seceded from Malaysia in 1965. Singapore was a very unpromising swamp, and it was turned one of the most potent economic powerhouses in Asia. I haven't been there, but Laura has, and she said it's clean, efficient, well run, and it's a phenomenal example. So much so that Helen Ziller got into great trouble when she pointed out that Singapore used to be a colony and they're not whinging about it. They're just getting ahead with free market and they're doing much better than we are. And why can't we follow? And I thought she'd commit the unspeakable sin by mentioning something like that. But what she said was common sense and true reality. Most people forget that Namibia was an integral part of South Africa. It was our fifth province. We'd played provincial rugby and all the rest of it between it. And Namibia seceded from South Africa in 1990. And actually, they're doing better than we are. On any level you want to look at, it's a lot more stable a country, a lot lower crime rate and all the rest of it. So Namibia is doing well, and Namibia's got a fraction of the population the Western Cape has. Now, as a missionary for over 39 years, who's concentrated on serving persecuted Christians and restricted access countries, I've traveled in 42 countries and I've worked in 38 countries across 4 continents. And this included throughout Eastern Europe, behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War, everywhere from Poland and East Germany and north through Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria and through Yugoslavia down to Albania. So I got to see Eastern Europe even before the Iron Curtain came down. There never was such a concept as Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia before the vindictive, destructive Versailles Treaty of 1919. And those entities do not exist today either. They were bad ideas from the beginning. Free and independent nations have broken away from those empires. Yugoslavia, meaning the land of the South Slavs, included Slovenia and Croatia, definitely not Slavic, but were formerly part of Austrian culture, an Austrian empire with Germanic language and culture. However, this fragile political entity called Yugoslavia was composed of 6 republics, 5 nationalities, 4 languages, 3 major religions, 2 alphabets, but only 1 political party, the Communist Party under Bronze Tito from 1945 to 1989. Another kaleidoscope nation created out of the Versailles Treaty was Czechoslovakia, which didn't survive long the fall of the Iron Curtain and the withdrawal of Soviet armies of occupation. These were not creations of any natural forces. These were enforced from outside, as was the Union of South Africa. Nobody chose the Union of South Africa. The British government forced it on. Nobody had a referendum to choose. Transvaal, Free State were bludgeoned into it, and the Cape and Natal were just ordered into it. We were never asked, do we want to be part of this shotgun marriage with the Union of South Africa? The Union of South Africa was imposed by the British Empire. Why must we stick in what the Rothschilds wanted long after its purpose has passed? When I first visited Yugoslavia and heard people in Croatia speaking about the need for independence, I was highly skeptical. Yugoslavia consisted of 6 republics, 5 nations, 4 languages, 3 major religions, 2 alphabets, 1 political party, and there's their flag, this monster, ugly red star in the middle of it. In 1990, the first multi-party elections were held in Croatia. 25th of June 1991, Croatia declared independence, which came into effect 8th of October 1991. By 15 January 1992, Croatia was recognized as an independent country by the European Economic Community led by Germany. Germany is the first to recognize Croatia's independence. The aggression by Yugoslavia was effectively ended by August 1995. With a decisive victory by Croatia, 5 August has been observed as Victory and Homeland Thanksgiving Day since. In Slovenia, a group of intellectuals articulated the case for Slovene independence from 1987 in the magazine Nova Revija, and a Committee for the Defense of Human Rights was formed. Now, it's still a one-party communist dictatorship at this point. Demands for democratization and independence for Slovenia forced the communist government to enact a number of democratic reforms. In September 1989, constitutional amendments were passed to produced parliamentary democracy to Slovenia. On the 7th of March 1990, the Slovenian Assembly changed the official name of the state to the Republic of Slovenia. April 1990, the first democratic elections in Slovenia took place, first ever. 23rd December 1990, more than 88% of the electorate voted in a referendum for sovereign independent Slovenia. And they declared their independence 25th of June 1991. The Yugoslav People's Army invaded 27th of June 1991, which led to the 10-day war, also called the 9-day war, but 9 or 10-day war, it was over very quick. And the result was the Brijuni Agreement and the withdrawal of the Yugoslav army from Slovenia. December 1991, a new constitution was adopted, followed by laws on denationalization, privatization of all state enterprise by 1992. This was fast. From 1987 to 1992, complete independence recognized internationally, even by their previous oppressors, after an incredibly brief war. The members of the European Union recognized Slovenia as an independent state on 15 January 1992, with Austria being the first to recognize it. And so, we now have 6 countries where there once was one, and a whole lot better for all the inhabitants at that. When I first traveled to Bratislava in Czechoslovakia, talk of the Slovakians seceding from Czechoslovakia just seemed unrealistic and impossible. I mean, to me it was like talking about colonizing Mars or something. Not going to happen. The Christians were adamant that Slovakia must become an independent country. Indeed, following the collapse of communist rule in Czechoslovakia in 1989 and the withdrawal of the Soviet Red Army, the Slovak Socialist Republic was renamed the Slovak Republic. 17th of June 1992, Slovakia declared itself a sovereign state, meaning that its laws took precedence over those of the federal government. Throughout the autumn of 1992, negotiations with the Czech federal government resulted in a vote 31st of December 1992 to dissolve Czechoslovakia. The Slovak Republic and the Czech Republic went their separate ways after 1st of January 1993. And so they called this the Velvet Divorce, because no one died. 1993, peaceful referendum. The 2 countries are now happy neighbors because good fences make good neighbors. The overthrow of communist rule in Czechoslovakia had been called the Velvet Revolution because it was mostly accomplished without any violence. And the peaceful separation of Czech and Slovakia is called the Velvet Divorce. Then you get to the Baltic states. Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia. 3 Baltic states which were occupied over the centuries by Sweden, which was once a superpower, Poland, which was once a very aggressive state, and Russia, of course. The Republic of Latvia was established 18 November 1918 when it seceded from the Soviet Union, just like Finland had done. In 1940, though, Latvia was invaded by the Soviet Union, and later Latvia was liberated by German forces during Operation Barbarossa in 1941, and many of them actually served in the German army fighting throughout Operation Barbarossa against the Soviets. In 1944, the Soviet Red Army again invaded Latvia and forced it back into the Soviet Union. Starting in 1987, the Singing Revolution called for Baltic emancipation from communism and from Soviet occupation. And on the 4th of May 1990, the Declaration of the Restoration of Independence of the Republic of Latvia was issued. On 21st of August 1991, Latvia declared its independence. I mean, this is quite fast. This is extraordinary. Latvia has been declared the capital of culture in Europe, and its capital, Riga, has hosted the Choir Olympics, which Daniela, as part of the Cape Town Youth Choir, has been able to participate in. 140 choirs from around the world gathered in Riga for this event, and I believe the Stellenbosch University Choir won the category of sacred music, which is an extraordinary achievement. For this little Baltic republic to have gained this kind of prominence in such a short time and freedom, absolutely extraordinary. Estonia was also occupied over the centuries by the Polish, the Swedish and the Russian forces, declared its independence also in 1918, as the Bolsheviks were destroying Russia, and on the 6th of August 1940 invaded and occupied by Stalin's Soviet Red Army, incorporating the Soviet Union with a lot of brutality. Well, Estonians continued to resist the Soviet occupation for years. During the Second World War, of course, on the side of the Germans, afterwards, the Forest Brothers resistance movement opposed the Soviet policy of collectivization and forced removals of Estonians to make way for Russian immigration. Many Estonians were shipped off to the salt mines and to Siberia, exile and work in labor camps, and died in Siberia. But they fought in the bush. And by the way, I don't know if you can spot here with these men. These were some of the resistance fighters. Some of the picture looks a bit scratched and folded, but the weapons they're using here, weapons they've captured from the enemy, and they were fighting for 10 years after the Second World War. They were still fighting the Soviets. In 1987, the singing revolution began because they didn't have much resistance opportunity, so they started to revive their culture and sing, and this brought the people together. It's very hard to say you're not allowed to sing. And so the Popular Front of Estonia became the standard bearer for Estonian independence. An Estonian National Independence Party was the first non-communist party in the Soviet Union. It demanded full restoration of independence. And they would gather to sing, and the candle became the symbol of resistance to communism back from the Leipzig movement, which started back in 1982. So the Leipzig prayer meeting was, they would come with candles, not lit, and then one would be lit, and then they'd light one of those candles. And the idea is, not all the darkness can put out the smallest light. Light is more powerful than darkness. Truth is more powerful than lies and error. And that communism is darkness, it's lies, it cannot survive simple light. A simple candle is more powerful than all the darkness. And so you'll see there, this is a sign of the protest throughout the whole of Eastern Europe, especially it started in Leipzig, but here in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they use the candles a lot. Estonia never joined the USSR. I mean, this was not a marriage. As I said, this is a rape. Estonia wants freedom from an abusive government. On the 16th of November 1988, the Estonian Supreme Soviet issued a sovereignty declaration asserting the primacy of Estonian laws over Soviet Union laws. This is very brave. I mean, this is when the Soviet Union is still in its heyday. In 1988, we were still fighting them in Angola. I mean, the hot part of the Cold War was still on, and they could have crushed them under their tanks. These are very brave people. 23rd of August 1989, I mean, this is while the Berlin Wall's collapsing, and all over Eastern Europe there's all kinds of eruptions. 2 million Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians participated in a massive demonstration. We have a life chain. Well, they had a Baltic Way human chain with 2 million people across 3 republics. So you can see the line of the Baltic chain. Along the side of the road, see the nice old cars from Ladas and Moskoviches back from it looks like they're made in 1950s, but these would be 1980s cars, that's 1980. And demanded restorations. Singing and peaceful protest was their way. In 1990, the Congress of Estonia was formed as a representative body of Estonian citizens, and in March 1991, a referendum was held where 77% of voters supported independence. You wonder what on earth was wrong with the other 33%. A Moscow coup attempt was exposed and resisted, and Estonia declared its restoration of independence 20th of August 1990, which is now a national holiday in Estonia. The last units of the Red Army only left Estonia in 1994, so they continued to act as an independent country even while the Red Army was occupying them, and it took a few years before the Russians said, you know, we might as well just leave, we're not wanted here anymore. And they got the message ultimately. And these are wonderful people. You can ask Daniela, she's visited these places. So in 1992, Estonia launched economic reforms for privatization and free market economy, and in 2004 they actually joined the European Union and NATO. And you can see the Baltic people, you may wonder, well, why don't they just make one country? Because they're different people. They descended from Germanic, Viking, Swedish, Finnish and other peoples, but they've got their own language and culture. Now, Estonia and Latvia are overwhelmingly Protestant. Lithuania is mostly Catholic. So, coming to Lithuania. Lithuania seceded from the Soviet Union 16th February 1980 to form the Republic of Lithuania. 1940, like its brother states, invaded by the Soviet Red Army of Stalin, and they also joined with and supported Germany in Operation Barbarossa in freeing the country from the Soviet occupation, and then they were crushed again in 1945 when the communists came in. On 11th of March 1990, a year before the formal dissolution of the Soviet Union, Lithuania became the first Baltic republic to declare itself independent. 11th of March 1990, a full year before the dissolution, Lithuania became the first state to declare independence. And so at that point, the Supreme Council announced the restoration of the independence, and on 28th of March, the Soviet Union imposed an economic blockade in Lithuania. This blockade lasted 74 days. But Lithuania stood firm. You can imagine, total lockdown, nothing allowed to be imported, exported, border frozen, but the people stood firm. And the Soviet Union attempted a coup in Lithuania. They stormed the Seimas Palace, and the Lithuanians vigorously defended their council, inspired other Soviet republics to secede from the Union. So they did a very brave, bold work of resistance. You can see the people are resisting the Soviet tanks. P-76 is coming in there. Shortly after 11th of February 1991, the Parliament of Iceland voted to confirm Iceland's 1922 recognition of Lithuanian independence. They said, we don't need to recognize them. Our recognition of 1922 stands in effect. We never formally recognized the Soviet Union's occupation of Lithuania. And what it takes for independence to work in terms of international laws, you need one other sovereignly recognized country to recognize the independence of that country. And so Iceland was effectively the first to say, to be brave enough to say, Lithuania is independent, sending our ambassador over. And that started domino effects. Others, most people aren't willing to be the first, but they might be willing to follow. Iceland stated full diplomatic relations should be re-established as soon as possible. On the 25th of October 1992, the citizens of Lithuania voted in a referendum to adopt their new constitution. So these are the three states. You've got Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. 31st of August 1993, the last units of the Russian army finally withdrew from Lithuanian territory. It took them a while to get the message, but finally they left peacefully. Since 2004, Lithuania has become a member of NATO and the European Union, and these are others who've joined the European Union since Cyprus and Malta, and of course we've mentioned many of these others, but Hungary was another story. Well, since 1995, I've been involved in a campaign for South Sudan's independence. From 1995 to 2002, I conducted 27 missions into Sudan, delivering 500,000 Bibles and books in 24 languages throughout South Sudan and the Nuba Mountains. And during this time, I had at least 1,200 meetings in South Sudan, another 1,000 meetings, TV and radio programs internationally to campaign for Sudan's independence. And this involved writing the book Faith and Defiant Sudan, and the third edition is 3 times the size of the first edition, which came out in 1996. I brought in filmmakers like Pat Matrician of Jeremiah Films. He produced Sudan in the Holocaust, Terrorism and Persecution, and assisted Samaritans to produce their first films on Sudan, which helped them establish the hospital pioneered by Dr. Fraser in Lui. Now, initially, even the leaders of the Sudanese People's Liberation Army, the SPLA, were skeptical that the map could ever be redrawn, as the African Union had resisted all changes to the borders delineated in the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. I strenuously argued with Colonel John Garang, this man second from the left here. He is the leader and founder of the SPLA, and with Commander Silva Kiir, the man third from left, who is now, by the way, the president of South Sudan. But at that time, he was second commander of the SPLA, and they argued it'll never happen. It's not possible. All we can hope for is autonomy. We can't ever get independence. And I argued with them that only independence for South Sudan could secure their freedom and their future. They would just be a oppressed black Christian minority in an Arab Muslim country unless they redraw the map. And redraw the map to South Sudan where they are a majority. Where blacks and Christians are the majority, otherwise they'll be just oppressed by the Muslim Arabs. You have to redraw the map for the sake of peace. And I argued this with them, and they were, it'll never happen. It's not possible. Berlin Conference, maps never been redrawn. The African Union will never accept it. Missionaries had actually pleaded with Great Britain in 1955, do not include the black Christians and animists of South Sudan into an Arab-ruled Sudan. They made suggestions, incorporate Equatoria into Kenya or Uganda, but to no avail. From the very first day of independence, so the 1st of January 1956, even as the British were bringing down their flag and the Sydneys were putting their flag up, the war was in full swing between a Muslim North and a Christian South. The North sought to Arabize and Islamize the South with brutal oppression, great devastation, and loss of life. And it started, in fact, with the Equatorial Corps down in Juba. Equatorial Corps was ordered to bring in your weapons and stack them in the armory, and to get onto the train unarmed and go to the north. And they said, we know you Arabs. You've always treated us as slaves. We're the guardians of the South. We're not handing in our rifles. And we're not going to get in any train to go to the north. And that's when the war started. And one of my friends up there, Canon Reuben, he was Equatorial Corps at the time. He still has his cap from Equatorial Corps. They said, we fired the first shots of the war. We killed the Arab officers and started Ananya 1, or the War for Independence that started in 1955, actually. That's even before the British had totally left. Because, in fact, they said at independence, when the British left, of the 800 officials running South Sudan, 796 were Muslim Arabs from the north. There were only 4 blacks, and they were all Muslims too, mind you, from the south. We were being colonized in our own country. We were not even allowed to have our own representatives, district commissioners, police chiefs, the whole lot. And so the war started right there. The Arabs immediately, Friday's the day of rest, Sunday's the day for school and the markets and so on, and Arabic's the language, you're not allowed to speak your own language and things like this. And it was just vicious war. And I showed from Sudan's history and from the teachings of Islam why the only way to be free of Sharia law and Arab oppression is to fight for independence and sovereignty of South Sudan and the Nuba Mountains. Although they were highly skeptical that this was at all possible, today South Sudan is an independent country, recognized internationally. And Silver Keir, standing in the middle here with the red beret next to me, at that point in 2001, he was still arguing with me, it'll never happen. Well, 10 years later, he was president of South Sudan. And Silver Keir has been its president since 9th of July 2011. And the theme of that independence campaign was, let my people go. And the symbol was for secession, a hand up, enough, a black hand, enough of the Arabs. And this was in 2005, they had the referendum on whether we'd get independence. And the people voted overwhelmingly. It was in the 89% for independence. And it's the sign that they voted. And so this is the polling stations for the referendum in 2005. And 2011, because they wanted a cooling off period of 6 years before independence would actually happen to allow for, and it was mostly peaceful and so on. And so this is the scene in Juba, independence. This, by the way, is a Mi-8 Hip helicopter, same kind of helicopter I was captured in Mozambique in 1989, Soviet manufacture. And the Sudanese love their crosses. And these are some of the war veterans. Now, these are real veterans who fought a real war without legs, amputees, who've lost limbs to the landmines and the fighting at the time. And I never saw them like this in this kind of uniform when I was there, let alone with gloves. And here's Silver Keir, the president of South Sudan, on Independence Day, and he's wearing this lovely Texan hat. And you wonder where that Texan hat comes from? George Bush Jr. George Bush welcomed Silver Keir to his farm in Texas and gave him his hat, and he wears it like a crown since. And this is the most popular fashion accessory now in South Sudan. All the South Sudan men like to have Texas hats. So this is a whole new culture that's been brought in there. And lifting up their constitution, and to think that, by the way, that's interesting, just behind us, Franklin Graham. And I managed to ambush Franklin Graham to get him involved in this work, because after going to Sudan in 1996, the people had said to me, you must help us with hospital. Now, the first thing they asked for was Bibles, which I brought in from 1995 on. And I said, we need a hospital. There's not a hospital for 8 million people. So man's got those limitations. I'm not medical. What do I know about that? And but I knew Samaritan's Purse. I'd been with them in Rwanda, and I'd seen what's happened in Rwanda, that All the medical groups left. Red Cross, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, they're all out left. During the Holocaust Rwanda, the only medical group there was Samaritan's Purse. And I was with them. I was in their hospital that they were cleaning out, putting on overalls, Wellington boots, crawling into the drains and clearing out the body parts. There were 8,000 human corpses in this one hospital in Kigali. And the entire plumbing was clogged. And to break up the congealed blood and to enable the drainage to work, it was a filthy business. And you cannot imagine how many, not thousands, hundreds of thousands of rats there were. Rats everywhere, all big rats bigger than our cats. And there were rats all over, and at night we'd be in this place and they had all kinds of rat traps around, and every now and then you'd hear a rat trap clamp, and there'd be a chair throughout the whole house. And one night I remember this one woman who had a pathological fear of rats, and for some reason she chose the top bunk, thinking the top bunk was the best way to be free of rats. Well, it's the worst place to be, because the rat came through the roof onto this poor American woman, and she woke up screaming, running there thinking she was under attack. Meanwhile, it was only a rat that was nibbling on her. And we'd literally sleep with a mag light and a machete. We'd be batting away rats at night while trying to sleep. Well, I knew Franklin Graham's the man. Let's get Samaritan's Purse into Sudan. So I wrote to his office and I got a polite letter back. Sorry, busy, overcommitted, not possible. So I'm thinking about this, and next thing, what lands on my desk? A beautiful gilt embossed white envelope and openness embossed thing. Here's a card with gilt in it. The Mayor of Cape Town invites you to a prayer breakfast with a special guest speaker will be Franklin Graham. Franklin Graham coming to Cape Town. He's going to speak at an evangelistic rally in Newlands cricket grounds, which my dad used to run. And I've got an invitation to the Mayor's prayer breakfast. Well, what a deal. So I wrote again and I asked for, is there possible to get a meeting with Franklin Graham when he comes to Cape Town and so on? Not possible, overcommitted, so on and so forth. And that's when I got this invitation. So I made sure I was there really early, parked my motorbike right up where the City Hall was, went inside and with my helmet over my arm, and there's Franklin Graham and the Mayor standing at the door. And I might have been the first day, and as I shook his hand and said, Franklin Graham, I believe you also motorbike. And he beamed and said, yes, I've got a Harley Davidson. I said, I believe you've also been involved in training chaplains for the Contra rebels in Nicaragua. And he said, yes, I have. I said, I've been doing that with Renamo in Mozambique and UNITA in Angola. Mr. Graham, I've got one question for you. Why is Samaritan's Purse not in Sudan? He was a bit defensive. He said, well, we have been in Sudan. I said, up and now, 4 years ago. And he said, well, we found the people unreliable and we couldn't work with them. I said, you were working with Riek Mashar's crowd. They're surrogates for the Arab government. He said, I didn't know that. I said, I know just the place for you to work, the people who you can trust. In the oldest hospital in southern Sudan, it's abandoned right now, but was planted by the first missionary to South Sudan, Kenneth Fraser. Mr. Graham, give me a team. Let's get Samaritan's Purse in South Sudan. Now, at this point, there's a queue of people lining up behind. So he said, I'll speak to you later. And he did. He came, found my desk, where I was, and he said, this is Mr. Ken Isaacs, he's in charge of my operations team. Explain to him your vision. So I sat down with Ken Isaacs, who initially was hands folded, leaning back, legs crossed, real negative body language. But after a few pictures and stories, he's leaning forward, looking through my photo albums and really interested. Well, 2 days later, I get a phone call saying, Franklin's given the green light. We need you to take our team in 2 days from now. I've got programs, I've got commitments. And he said, Peter, you've got a green light. Go through the intersection. Okay, cancel everything. Off to Kenya, took the team in, and there's a whole lot of amazing things that happened to make it really work. But they came in within weeks after that, and they got set up, and they were there for years. In fact, Franklin Graham said, we never are in any place longer than 6 months. Samaritan's Purse is short term. We seldom commit to more than 3 months. We've never committed to more than 3 months before. We'll commit to 6 months in South Sudan. Well, they were there for 10 years. They performed over 200 operations. And they really made the blind to see with cataract surgery and a whole lot of great things. And at one point I said, so what happened to we never anywhere more than 6 months? And just like 2 years later, he said, well, it's your fault, he says. We've got so much designated funding from the films that were made that we're going to be here for years. In fact, in the end, to get out of Sudan, Samaritan's Purse built over 250 churches for churches that had been bombed, with funds that had been designated for them, because they had to finish the designated money so they could move on to other projects. They had so much it was designated. I think it was in the millions, $6 million or something, designated for South Sudan. Don't know why we can't raise that money for our work. But anyway, Samaritan's Purse Hospital got involved there, and Franklin Graham was personal friends with George Bush. And in fact, Franklin Graham did the prayer inauguration for the president at the inauguration of George Bush. And so he was the ideal man to take their concerns directly to the President of America, and a whole lot of interesting things started to roll from there. This picture says a lot. A man who's lost both his hands, probably chopped off by the Arabs, raising his hands or his stumps in praise to God for independence. From today, our identity is Southern and African, not Arabic and Islamic. We're not worse Arabs, but we're better Africans. Their own flag, their own army, and this is at the first anniversary of the independence. And South Sudan has its problems still, of course, but it's free and it's independent and it's recognized, and they're no longer under Sharia law, and they have their own identity, their own seal, their own currency, and they are free at last. The story's not over, because since then they've discovered oil in South Sudan, which you could be sure the map would not have left it in South Sudan if they'd known it ahead of time. And just by sheer coincidence, there's war and destabilization around where the oil fields are. I must say, oil is a curse. The sooner we can get into alternatives, the better, because honestly, the amount of wars caused by oil, it's just like, as Paul Kruger said, it's a curse that we had diamonds and gold in our republics, or we might have stayed free. You know, these things actually aren't a blessing. The amount of problems they bring with them, that's another story. But we must still pray for South Sudan, and we still are working for South Sudan. Today we continue to campaign for the freedom and independence of the Nuba Mountains, an island of Christianity in the Sea of Islam. They were not included in the agreement or the peace with South Sudan because they're a bit further north. And so the Nuba Mountains is continuing to be a major focus of our mission. The courageous Nuba Christians continue to resist the Arabization and the Islamization policies of the Khartoum government, and redrawing the map is absolutely essential to recognize the ethno-linguistic, demographic realities and to avoid further loss of life and future conflict. And at this moment, there's a ceasefire in place. In fact, there's been a ceasefire in place since Donald Trump came to power, because he put pressure on the Sudanese government, said, I know what you want, free trade and sanctions lifted. Let me tell you what I want. No more hostile actions, no bombings, no offences against Nuba Mountains in South Kordofan, the Blue Nile, or in Darfur. And they did. And before you knew it, they overthrew their dictator. Omar al-Bashir had been in power for almost 30 years, put him on trial, promising to hand him over to the International Court of Justice for his genocide and all the rest. And now the government of Sudan is actually passing laws banning whipping, banning flogging, decriminalizing what they call apostasy, where a Muslim would convert to Christianity and so on. So there's a lot of interesting things. They've signed peace treaties with the Nuba. So there hasn't been any bombing for the last almost 5 years, 4.5 years in the Nuba Mountains. And there's peace for a lot of work that can be done. So we must not continue to follow in the footsteps of failure. Centralization in a unitary state is as doomed to failure as the Tower of Babel. As you can see, Bruegel's classic portrait of the Tower of Babel, mimicked by the European Union in their poster, Europe, many tongues, one voice. How blatant is that? And even their parliament built like a Tower of Babel, even incomplete with the scaffolding. We need to rather emulate examples of excellence, such as the decentralized model of Switzerland and the free enterprise model of Singapore. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, also known as the Congo Conference or the West African Conference, sought to avoid conflict by regulating European protectorates and colonies in Africa to effectively eradicate the slave trade and to avoid conflict between European powers. The European powers also gathered at this conference were seeking to prevent rising American, Russian, Japanese encroachments on Africa. They couldn't see far enough to see that China would be doing it, but it wasn't only negative. There was a positive side. They wanted to end the slave trade. They wanted to develop Africa. They wanted to avoid conflict. And to a large extent, they were pretty successful. However, due to lack of information and very incomplete understanding of the realities of Africa, often borders were drawn along lines of longitude and latitude, or utilizing a river. But communities live on both sides of the same river frequently. You know, imagine if you made the Rhine the border, or the Danube the border, or the Mississippi. There's same people on both sides of the river. You can't just make an arbitrary river the border. And so that doubtless wasn't fully realized at the time. However, in my missionary work, it's become clear that the map needs to be redrawn. Half the Shandong people live in Mozambique and speak Portuguese. The other half live in South Africa and speak English. Half the Ivamba people live in Angola, where they've learned Portuguese and they drive on the right-hand side of the road. The other half live in Southwest Africa, Namibia, learning Afrikaans or English, driving on the left-hand side of the road, and in different time zones, despite being north and south of one another. The Chichewa people are divided between Malawi, Zambia, and Mozambique. And you could continue this throughout Africa. The maps do not reflect the geopolitical or the ethno-linguistic realities of Africa. And the greatest conflicts in Africa, like the Biafran Civil War in Nigeria, devastating. Millions of people died in it. In the Congo Wars, something in the region of 12 million people died in the Great Lakes Wars in the 1990s in the Congo. And the long conflict in Sudan. All of this could have been averted if the maps had reflected demographic realities and not forced people to be minorities in their own country, oppressed by other cultures, tribes, or religions. And so you just look at this and you can see there's a massive diversity of people in different parts of Africa. And you can also see how the Western Cape is demographically very different from the rest of Africa. It's inexcusable that since independence, the Organization of African Unity has steadfastly refused to allow maps to be redrawn. Now, the apparent exception is Eritrea, but Eritrea was a separate entity, and they were only forced to be part of Abyssinia after the Second World War, after South Africa helped liberate Abyssinia. Then, from the Italians, the British then decided to force Eritrea, which had been under the Italians, to join Abyssinia, which had never been a colony of anyone, and make them one country, Ethiopia. And that just led to non-stop war from 1945 to 1991, when the Eritreans finally won their freedom again. So redrawing the maps and recognizing the independence of South Sudan was a monumentally important precedent. It's not like Eritrea, which was just reverting back to what was the Berlin Conference originally. And so here we are in the Cape. Cape Town's history goes back to 1652. Now, just a few years ago, the Kingdom of Zululand celebrated 200 years of the Kingdom of Zululand. That's a wonderful achievement. The Cape has got almost 4 centuries history of a unique cultural mix in the Cape. And the oldest building in the Southern Hemisphere is the castle. And it just reminds us, before there was a shack where they today have Joburg or Pretoria, Cape Town was an established entity with a tremendous cultural civilization. We have the oldest windmill in the Southern Hemisphere, dating back to the 1700s. The Cape has got its own culture. And therefore, Cape Exit has been gathering a lot of support. There's something in the region right now of over 820,000 people have already signed up with Cape Exit under the slogan of Free the Cape. And to have a canton system, a decentralized system of the Cape. There is a party dedicated to Cape independence, the Cape Party. Don't just hope for a better life, vote for one. And instead of continuing to support the corruption and nepotism that's going on in this city, even from the DA, who can only say that, look, we're better than the ANC. Well, yes, but they're not as good as they should be. You know, next to the ANC, everyone can look good. We deserve better in Cape Town than what the DAs do, or what we call a DANC. And even Elizabeth endorses a fresh approach in our votes. So the Cape Party is running in this upcoming municipal election. That's an opportunity for us to give a vote for independence. I think we should join Cape Exit. We should vote to secede from the communist-controlled ANC. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Though an army may encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war may arise against me, in this I will be confident. Free the Cape, Cape Exit. And you'll notice outside we have made our stand by flying the Cape Independence Movement flag with the anchor. We sang earlier, we have an anchor. So, any questions, any comments or complaints? Yes?
Do you think it's worth making a civil war for this training?
No, I think we're long past. I don't think there's any danger of having a civil war. I don't think there's. We're way past that stage in history. If Quebec had voted for independence from Canada a few years ago, there wouldn't have been a war about it. And same with Scotland. Scotland would have gone free if Scotland had voted for independence from Britain. It was fairly close, but the majority voted to stay in the United Kingdom. We are way past it. Not even Russia fights over secession anymore. You know, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, I mean, they're all able to. We're in a different era now. You know, Czechoslovakia was peaceful. Not only do I believe that the central government has no ability to wage a war, because their army is, you know, it's got thousands of generals and not that many soldiers. And that they actually, a lot of things don't work and it's not very efficient. In fact, you know the average age in the South African Army right now? 37. When I was in the Army, the average age was 20. But anyway, obviously things have changed, and the average weight of the average soldier in the South African Army is double what we were when I was in, that's for sure. So I don't believe we're talking about a civil war. If it's done legally, if it's done with obviously the majority support of the population of Western Cape, I believe this can be done peacefully. That's not to say that there wouldn't be some riots and terrorism here and there, but when you're in a position to deal with it, that would be different. But I don't know anywhere in the world where people would fight a civil war over a peaceful, legal, following the correct steps of referendums and going about secession in a lawful, legal, stable way. It's way past that date. Abraham Lincoln wouldn't get away with what he did back then these days. You can't destroy a country for people peacefully want to go the way. It's just like today, it's accepted that if a woman is abused, she has the right to divorce an abusive husband. And that's what we're basically talking about. We're talking about abusive relationship in this particular situation. So under this situation, we either stay in this abusive relationship or we divorce, and this is what it is. Cape Exit is a divorce. And it's not right for the husband to come and kill the person and her brother and father and cat because they decided to divorce him. You know, we're way past the age where they think that a government's got the right to do that, or that an abusive husband's got the right to do that. Yes?
You said another country in the world had to recognize it as a dependent country before it was.
Yes.
How soon do you think that would happen after you?
Well,
or how ready?
We have some friends. Personally, I can tell you, I believe our best friend and the first country that will recognize our independence is the Netherlands. We have friends right up to the royal family and parliament in the Netherlands. I've spoken to a man who was Speaker of the House of the Netherlands Parliament, who has his master's in writing on the situation in South Africa. In fact, he wrote a book, translated in English, A Minority in Our Own Country. He did his master's thesis on how the Dutch media lied to the Dutch people to have them betray their kith and kin in South Africa into the hands of the communists. And how what's happening to South Africa is what's going to happen to the people in the Netherlands if they don't recognize and reverse this, where you become minority in your own country. And in fact, that's the Freedom Party's position. They strongly against Islamization and so on. It produced the Fitna film and showed what jihad can do, and it just doesn't belong in the Netherlands. So I believe we've got our greatest sympathy right now. And the people who will be the quickest to recognize independence is the Netherlands. Yes, Indonesian.
No, could you just explain what happened to Catalonia a few years ago?
Right, Catalonia. A lot of people got super excited when they saw Catalonia going for independence. Oh, this is great. And then I had some friends from Spain saying, these are a bunch of communists. You do not want to... The communists had hijacked the independence movement of Catalonia, and that while the Catalonians may have a genuine cause, the whole cause got hijacked by communists. Just like the IRA went way out of their Catholic roots and became a communist terrorist movement who were funded and trained by the KGB and by Gaddafi's Libya. And so the IRA was almost unrecognizable from what Catholic origins they once had. So the Catalonian independence movement was basically a total communist front organization. And so the King of Spain and the Parliament had every justification to want to prevent a Cuba within what used to be their borders. So Catalonia, it just shows the danger of letting radicals hijack the independence movement. And I have seen some people in the Cape independence movement who would like to take us in that radical movement. They're people who talk about war, who talk about terrorism, who talk, and you're like, you have no place for this. We want nothing to do with you. Those people are agent provocateurs. And if you let those agent provocateurs run the whole movement, imagine an EFF type of Cape independence movement. I mean, that would be nightmare, worse than what we've got now. And I think that was what was going on with Catalonia. Nice coloured flags, but was hiding an ugly reality. The whole thing was a security risk for the people of Spain. Sadly, not that Catalonia doesn't have a legitimate case for independence, but the people who came to run the whole thing, where their funding came from, I'd be interested to know, but I think that's a whole scandal in itself. Sadly so. Other comments, observations?
Just not so much that there's going to be that outright civil war, but if you look at what happened in America, these people, they come along and they just, oh, well, it just so happens that you lost the vote. Sorry. And then, and we feel that you're terrorists now in America. And
that's correct.
at that, and they
yes.
just surrounded the parliament with military, and it looked like a military dictatorship all of a sudden.
Which actually it is.
It wasn't an inch of violence. In fact, they were agent provocateurs doing useless things. They got no strategic advantage whatsoever when they went into the capital building, except get everybody into lots of trouble.
That's exactly correct. Now, again, that's an example of agent provocateurs infiltrating the movement. I've got every reason to believe that there are agent provocateurs being infiltrated within the Cape independence movement to try to derail it, not just to distract, but to derail it. And you've got to expect that anything important these days, war is not so much done on the outside, it's done from inside and done surreptitiously and done in the other person's uniform, and so, or civilian clothes for that matter. So one has to be cautious and careful, but that's why we've got to do things thoroughly, legally, wisely, clearly, and in the light. There's no place for subterfuges on here. It's the other side who want to do these things, dirty dealings in the dark. We talk about openly, peacefully, legally, in terms of legislation and the clear support of the majority of the voting age people in the Cape. Lenora.
But if you speak to anybody who's typically voted for the DA, they will say, oh, well, but you can't keep voting for all these tiny little parties because it amounts to nothing and we've got to stand up against the ANC, therefore we must vote for the DA. What do you say to them?
Well, just bear in mind that we have always beaten the ANC in the Western Cape. So, for example, there was a time when the Cape Province, Cape Peninsula, City of Cape Town were all controlled by the DP, the Democratic Party was the biggest party, but still a minority. And then they had an alliance with the National Party and with the ACDP. And the three formed together a troika. And they managed to rule, and in fact the DP at that stage was a lot more reasonable and not so pagan as it became later, once they got the majority. So if you go to a place like Switzerland or the Netherlands, there's never a majority party. You have to have coalitions because there's no part that has a majority, and that's actually healthy for democracy. When you get a bloated party that's got a massive majority, they just get more corrupt with every election on. So it's much better to keep them lower. So when people say, oh, if you vote for a small party, it's a vote for ANC, not true. The South African voting system is proportional representation. No vote is lost. Those votes can be shared out proportionally, and then those parties can form alliances, which they already said they would, and which they've done. So we had a time in the Cape when I remember the DA could only rule with the Freedom Front and the ACDP. In fact, at that stage, the DA had, I think, Deputy Mayor was ACDP and Town Clerk was Freedom Front. And at that stage, the DA was so well behaved and they're so much more efficient. But the moment they got a majority, they became arrogant, they became more pagan, they became more LGBTQ, and next thing it was they were running roughshod of everyone else, and you've got nowhere else to go but us. And it's not true. So the ANC has no chance of winning the Cape in terms of demographics. It just has never worked out. They've never gotten more than 29% to vote in the Western Cape. The ANC is having their supporters leaving them in droves anyway. The biggest danger in the Western Cape isn't the ANC anymore. But the DA is convinced that although they already have a majority in the Western Cape, they're going for the country. And they've just moved the DA's headquarters from Cape Town. They've fired all their Cape Town staff. They've moved up to the Transvaal. They've made in Gauteng some headquarters, Pretoria or Joburg. Right, so they're in Joburg. They've got their headquarters. And the DA is plainly aiming for a national goal. They don't seem to care about the Cape except that we've given them votes to give them, they have the hope of getting the whole country. Personally, I think they don't have a snowball's chance of getting the whole country. But they do have a chance of getting the Cape if they would go for a referendum and go for the Western Cape. But they've got their own agenda. The trouble with the DA is, if you compare them with the ANC, they look good. But if you compare them with what a government should be, they don't look that good. And we really deserve better. And driving around Cape Town, we can see it's really not doing that well. Alistair?
What do you see as the biggest threat to the successful movement?
The biggest threat to the movement for Cape Independence?
Yes.
I would say, well, it's not just one big threat. Our main threat would be probably ignorance. Because people either not aware of some of the things I've mentioned now, like the history of secession, the biblical basis for secession, or the practicalities of secession, ignorance of these things. People coming out with things like, well, we've got to vote DA for a strong opposition, or vote for a smaller party, even if it epitomizes my convictions and values, is somehow a vote for the ANC, which is nonsensical in our proportional representation system. So ignorance is probably our biggest single danger. Therefore, our biggest need is for people to know the facts, to know what's going on, to understand the times, to know what God's people should do. So history, Bible, all these things, knowledge is the solution, ignorance is our threat. A lot of people are just brainwashed. And unfortunately, if you keep watching the SATV, listening to the propaganda, then one's going to stay more ignorant. They're not exactly giving us any insights. Yes?
Do you know the leaders of the Cape Exit Party personally? Do you know where they stand on moral issues?
I know all of them, and the Cape Exit is not a party. Cape Exit is just a marketing group. They said they will not ever become a political party. They have no political aspirations. They're not registered a party. They're a marketing group. They're just trying to promote the concept of Cape Independence. And they're doing research, and they have a think tank. So Cape Exit is not a party. Cape Party is a party.
Yeah.
And so there's only two parties that I know of at this stage that are for Cape Independence. The one is the Cape Party, and they have been for 14 years. And the other is the Freedom Front Plus, who've come on sides, at least the Western Cape branch, for Cape Independence in the last year. So those are the two I'm aware of that are registered political parties. Now there's other groups who support Cape Independence. Cape Independence Action Group, they're a marketing group. Cape Exit's the biggest, they've got 820,000 members signed up. There's others who are moving for secession, but who've got a different strategy. There's USAF, who've got a big website, USAF, and they have Zuidland, Dalbarton, they have seceded basically practically up the west coast near, what's the,
Sorry, I can't remember.
right.
Filtered.
It's near Feltriff, that's correct. Very close to Feltriff. And they're buying up farms and they're becoming totally self-sufficient. They own everything off the grid. They own solar power, they own water, they own everything. And they're just basically creating, and they're going to buy up more and more land. And so they're going for independence in a different route, not the political route. USAF's like-minded in a sense. Then you get a group like ULA, United Liberty Alliance, which also isn't a party, but they don't have a view of the Cape only. Most of their interest is actually Free State and Transvaal, but they include some of the Cape. And so they've got a bigger vision of more areas to be made independent. They're working on minority rights and trying to find where the minorities are majority, that they can break away from the oppression of the ANC and communist EFF ideas. So I've met with these people, all of the players, frequently. I've been asked to chair the Cape Independence Forum over the last year. I've met with them socially, I've interviewed and I've interrogated and cross-examined, and I think I've got a pretty good idea where they all stand in some way. What's your next question?
I think the question is, what's their moral position?
Oh, right.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right. So some of the people that we're dealing with are Bible-believing, pro-life Christians. Others are secular people. Some are Muslims. In fact, there's whole Muslim groups are very enthusiastic for Cape Independence too. And I've been invited to speak in mosques and so on to groups that are thoroughly interested in Cape Independence. Intriguing. The vast majority of people supportive of Cape Independence right now would be coloured people. The Cape coloured community, especially Mitchell's Plain, very strong for Cape Independence. And their case is pretty good and strong. So, for example, I was at a conference with 50 of them, and they were saying, why is it that we cannot have one single policeman in our area in Mitchell's Plain, from Mitchell's Plain? There's not a single coloured policeman in the SAPS branch. There's not a policeman who speaks our language, which is Afrikaans. They all come from the Eastern Cape. Why must we have policemen from other areas who don't even speak our language? It's not like there aren't coloured policemen who speak Afrikaans available in the West Cape. Why can't they be in our area in Mitchell's Plain? And why is it that we have got grandmothers who've been waiting for 40 years on their list to get a house? And they still don't have. But someone can come in from the Eastern Cape last week and he gets it. And they're just furious. The affirmative action is so anti the coloured people. They are blood red furious. And I might say they've got a very strong case because 49% of the population of Western Cape are coloured. And there's a very strong case that the vast majority of the people of Western Cape speak Afrikaans. The main language, the main home language of the population of Western Cape is Afrikaans. Why is Afrikaans treated as a second, not even a second language? It's often just driven off. And so there's, I would say, our best support for the Western Cape isn't coming from the English Liberals. The English Liberals are some of our biggest opponents, actually. Our main support's coming from coloured people, Afrikaans-speaking people, and there's surprising amount of black people in the Western Cape who are fed up with the lies and the deceit and the corruption of the ANC and would love the idea of Cape Independence. So at the moment, it's, you know, when you look at the Muslims, this isn't, some people, I remember at one point, Cape Exit was being slandered in the media as, it's just a bunch of white Afrikaners, Cape Exit. Well now, after the last Cape Exit Congress, they've been called, it's just a coloured group. So, you know, this is the thing, they like to put you, they like to put them in a box and label, but you can't put Cape Exit in a box. It's across the board, demographically, linguistically, it's wide. And it's not just Christians, it's not just secular. And what makes it work? Well, how can the Cape work? We've got a lot of Muslims, a lot of Christians, a lot of secular people. We've got Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, Hare Krishnas. There's a lot of things in the Cape. There's a lot of languages and cultures. And how on earth can it work? We look at Switzerland. Good fences make good neighbours, cantons, decentralisation. You know, in Switzerland you can have a Catholic German canton, a Protestant German canton, a French Catholic canton, a French Protestant canton, an Italian Protestant canton, Italian Catholic canton. And that's the way it works, that they can all work together on a federal basis because they're all safe in their own areas where they control their own police, they control their own taxes, and they make the laws. And each canton's got quite a different character. And so Switzerland isn't a one-size-fits-all rubber stamp, you know. They let there be a lot of variety. And so that's why Switzerland's so free. And so I think following that example, the Cape can work if we let the Muslims run their areas and the Christians run their areas and the secularists run theirs and the Hare Krishnas run theirs, whatever the groups are, let the New Age incense burners in Cork Bay have their rules, and let the Bible-believing Boerewors Brian people in northern suburbs have their rules, and so this can work. So, for example, if you've got a confederation of microstates of the Cape of Good Hope, what you can have is a situation where, you know, Brackenfell is rock solid Bible-believing Protestant Christian. There we go. And Mitchell's Plain, they are solidly Christian. And Burkhardt, they're solidly Muslim. They want Sharia law even, or whatever. You know, but if every province or canton or municipality is making their own rules and running their own police force, you don't feel threatened. Yeah, they're your neighbors. And then you can actually even cooperate against external enemies and so on, because you respect the different identity. But where you're all forced one size fits all, you've all got to fit into this social engineering game of some political party in Pretoria, well, that makes everyone angry. And the Cape has never, ever agreed with the national government. We have been the biggest opposition and pain in the neck for the old National Party government and for the ANC, because the Cape is otherwise. You can't fit the Cape in the box of the rest of the country.
Between the Green Party and the Freedom Front, who would be the most Christian and who would actually put into place a canton, or not canton, but like that kind of separated system?
Yes, well, I must say, personally, I know and trust the Freedom Front for a very long time because I knew General Viljoen, fought under him in the army, and he's the founder of Freedom Front Plus. And so I must say I've voted for them nationally in every election since '94, as I voted for the ACDP provincially in '94 and '99. But lately I've come to see the Cape Party as ideal for provincial because they're an obvious vote for Cape independence and to have a counterweight. So to me, I think I can solidly recommend anybody to choose to vote for the Freedom Front Plus or choose to vote for Cape Party, but I think those are the two best parties, principle-wise, to look for what's best for the Cape. If you're going to ask who's the most Christian, Freedom Front Plus. But Cape Party's policies of absolute decentralization leaves room for Christian communities to produce a Christian municipality, and their philosophy is more libertarian. In other words, they believe government shouldn't be interfering in people's personal views. So they would go for defunding everything and letting everything be in the hands of private people, and central government's got next to no power except national defense. So the libertarian approach is a nice counterweight to the centralized, but they're not expressly Christian, but they're totally wide open to Christian influence and candidates. So the Cape Party is a libertarian party. The Freedom Front Plus is much more strong as a Christian party. And they've got a 100% rate on a biblical voters guide in terms of always voting pro-life and pro-family and so on. Alistair?
Why were the borders drawn where they were?
Why?
Yes.
You know, we had borders. Like the Cape Province went all the way up to the Orange River and all the way over to the Kai River. And next thing you know, they suddenly Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, and Eastern Cape includes Transkei and West. Who decided what the Western Cape is? So this is very arbitrary. And how dare they chop up the Transvaal, which was always a respected, recognized country, which was invaded by the British in 1900, and now suddenly there's Limpopo, there's Mpumalanga, there's Gauteng, and then parts of Northwest so the Transvaal's been cut into four. At least the Kingdom of Zululand's got its name and identity, but the Transvaal was wiped out of existence, which is wicked. At least the Free State still got its territorial integrity, even though they're ruled by the other side. So why the Cape's been chopped into three? Not acceptable to me. That's why we're not talking about Wexit. Some people are talking about Western Cape exit. When we talk about Cape exit, we might start with the Western Cape, but it won't stop there. There's a lot of people in Northern Cape that would want to join, and there are some parts of the Eastern Cape that may choose to join. And so in time, the Cape province may come to be closer to what it used to be. But you've got to start where you are. You know, in the event of loss of cabin pressure, please put on your own oxygen mask before attempting to help other passengers. So that's the principle, that we can help our neighbours better once we have our own territorial integrity and can start to not be pouring most of our taxes into this bottomless pit of corruption. You know that of the money that we pay in taxes, less than 8% of the taxes paid by Western Cape gets spent in the Western Cape. Less than 8%. So we could literally cut our taxes to 10%. Less, because without corruption and efficiency, we wouldn't even need that much. So that's why and I'm transgressing and not get to another, next week we're going to deal with the policies that make the Cape work, but we can have tax of 1%. I was discussing that with Stephen Midford-Whitson. Well, the Cape exit financiers have done further studies and they said we don't need 1%, 0.5% will be fine. Half a percent is all we need in taxes through total economic activity levy, electronic transfers, that's it. We don't need anything else. VAT can be abolished, income tax can be abolished. You don't need any of those taxes because it will be across the board, including Anglo-American and De Beers and Old Mutual. I mean, everyone pays 0.5%. And that will give us more than what we need. Just imagine the Western Cape. Who wouldn't want to bring in a business and move their industries into a province where you pay less than 0.5% tax total? So, anyway, those are just some ideas. Henry?
My concern on the Cape exit is it's mostly driven based on a decentralized
Model?
module and not that much based on biblical principles or faith movement. It's more decentralization to root out the obvious corruption that we all agree upon that's bad. What if the Muslims that's in the movement say no, Sharia law allows the following and we would like to implement that in the decentralization? Is it clearly stipulated what kind of rule is agreed upon? Because it doesn't help if you succeed and then the negotiation starts on how we're going to deal with the government side.
Right. So, there's a whole lot of things you can do. You can still have a basic core Bill of Rights, which applies to all the cantons. Say, like Switzerland has. And there's some things you can't suddenly legalize. So in Switzerland, for example, you cannot decide that there's a death penalty for people who convert from Catholicism to the Protestant faith in this canton. That's not an option. They built that in a long time back. So your cantons have a lot of freedoms, but there's some things such as, that's why you have Bills of Rights, or Britain had Magna Carta, to give this is a basic core stand. You can't go below this. This is your floor or ceiling, as the case may be.
And what's
Now,
that Bill of Rights based on? Biblical principles? Is
well,
based on what they all agree on?
Well, of course, Switzerland was based on biblical principles, and of course, Magna Carta is based on biblical principles. In England, ours is a mix of everything. I'm talking about the present one in South Africa. It's got some Christian influence, it's got other secular, which is why we have everything in it, from freedom of conscience, freedom of worship, through to sexual orientation and nonsense like that. So they basically married secular humanism with Christianity in our present Bill of Rights. So there's some good and there's some bad in it, a lot of bad. But we can still try and enforce some of our Bill of Rights here. In starting a new country, you've got the chance to start fresh. And then we've got to be sure that our solid base is built on a rock-solid biblical principles. That's why we're talking about following examples of excellence. Switzerland, Singapore, that sort of thing, not following totalitarian, Babylonian, Nineveh, Soviet Union stuff.
Isn't it a red flag if you see that the Muslims is one of the most majority groups in the Secession group.
Are they? I wouldn't have said majority. They're not a majority in the Cape, but they're significant.
Of course,
minority.
Say in the Secession, and they would want to implement their rules.
Yes, well, of course, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of worship, these are basic Bill of Rights principles. And so they'll be able to, if they want to say things like head coverings, Quranic study in the schools, there's got to be some things that they're free to do, just like we can say in our areas, in Brackenfell, we're going to have Bible education and so on and so forth in classrooms. They may have some modest, but they can say we can't have alcohol sold in our shops in Borkop. They can do a whole lot of things, but you cannot infringe on someone's freedom of conscience, freedom of worship, and right to life. So there's some basic limitations. A person cannot come out with any law if it violates the Bill of Rights on which the entire Confederation is built. This is a philosophy, but of course we're in early stages and you've got to negotiate it right. Now I'm part of the think tanks. I'm trying to influence the think tanks to think in a constructive biblical way. And that's why it's important for us as Christians to get involved, because when you've got a libertarian group like Cape Party, they're wide open to all sorts of views because they believe central government should be hands off almost anything. Now, of course, I believe in a little bit more government intervention than they would, but I prefer the libertarian approach vastly to what we've got right now, but we need to modify it somewhat. And with some of my friends in libertarian, for example, I would disagree with them when they say we don't need national parks. And I say, yes, we do need national parks. And we do need to protect the environment. And they say, well, free market will do that. I don't believe that. The free market can rip up everything, just like Newlands Forest would have been totally destroyed long before now if it hadn't been brought up and preserved as a national park with the foresight of Cecil Rhodes or Kruger National Park or Kruger and so on, or Etosha by Kaiser Wilhelm. You need foresight to protect some natural resource for the good of the whole country. So I'm not that libertarian that I'd say we don't need national parks. I say, yes, we do need it. But again, we need to be salt and light. We've got to be involved. And as Christians, we've got to be bringing biblical principles to the fore for secession. If people don't pick up their secession arguments like the Catalonians from Mao Zedong's Little Red Book, but they're going and getting their principles from the book of Exodus and Kings. We don't want them getting it from the Marxist revolutionaries. So at this stage, people are unhappy, people want change. It's for the church to be offering viable, excellent solutions.
Can I just add to Henry's comment that it's not even so much that we're looking for a Christian political party or a Christian political movement, it's that we're looking for freedom of worship. So the Catholics need to be allowed to worship in their way, and the Muslims need to be allowed to worship in their way and have the rules that they want in their schools. That's what freedom of religion is all about. And we're not voting for a pastor, we're voting for a political party, and I think that's what the Americans so often get wrong. When they, oh no, but he's not a this, that, or the other denomination, or he's a Mormon, so we can't vote for him. No, you're voting for a political person, and it's the freedom within that movement that we need to preserve, which we don't have now.
With the political person you're voting for, if the political person violates any of God's laws, then you will suffer the consequences of the sin that the country has committed. So it's very important that the country makes sure that the laws that they vote into place does not violate God's laws. Because if it violates God's laws, it will have the wrath of God on it.
Mm-hmm.
So if one say that one of the main, some of the great input on it is a Muslim group, then you have to be extremely cautious that they don't implement any of the Muslim laws which they bring to the party, which would directly violate biblical principles on it. And to make sure that if they do that, that it's within their area and that they can suffer the consequences for their
Well, the whole concept, and we'll get into that next week, on what principles can make this work. So a lot of this is, and I believe, the most decentralized possible, where there's very little power in the hands of central government, most of the power is in the hands of the local municipality, And there's a lot of safeguards that must be built in there too. But we as Christians must have our voice involved in the public square. We can't stand back and let secularists or Marxists decide how a country's run, which actually has happened. And right now, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to be in the forefront, involved with the Cape and Defence movement, which is a dynamic movement with many different strains and varieties and emphasis, because the Cape is a very varied area. This is a phenomenal cosmopolitan community. We are a port city. We are, as William Carey pointed out 200 years ago, Cape Town is the hinge between the east and the west. What other cities sit astride two oceans? A cold ocean, a warm ocean, Cape of Storms. We've got so many different language groups, religions. We can go out in Cape Town and do Muslim evangelism amongst Somalians and amongst Saudi Arabians in Cape Town, huge communities. I mean, there's just this Nigerian congregations, there's Congolese congregations in downtown Cape Town that I've got an invitation to minister. We have tremendous variety here. How's this going to work? The only way it can work is decentralization, good neighborliness, respecting neighbors. And if we've got a system where people don't feel threatened, you will find a lot better good neighborliness where people know just because you're doing it like that in Burkop doesn't mean we have to do it like that in Rondebosch. We are different communities and different municipalities. We respect one another's jurisdiction, but there must be a unifying principle. And I think a basic Bill of Rights that asserts these key principles: right to life, freedom of worship, these sort of things, freedom of movement. We're going to have to re-emphasize a lot of things like government has no right to tell you that you must wear a mask or close your business or can't exercise. And basic things, you have to close your church. No government ever has. They can give advice. Government could say, we think that this virus is so serious that you, and we could say, okay, or no. And it's not up to them. We're meant to be the people who rule this country, and they're just meant to be civil servants. And so to have, dictatorship by Fauci and co. So I think what's going on in the world right now illustrates why we need a more libertarian structure where we decentralize everything much more. And so the libertarians like Rand Paul, for example, in America have argued very well a libertarian case, which is, now they do go further than I would go, but nevertheless, they are saying get the government out of almost everything that's involved now, which is super good. If you ever hear Rand Paul's arguments, he's so logical and so factual. It's a breath of fresh air after these statist people who, the solution to every problem is the government must do something more. Whereas, just if the government would stay out of it, we'd do pretty much better on our own.
Your presentation, pretty much all the cases for independence, the majority seem to be out of communist oppression, correct? Roughly?
Not only, but yes, but in Eastern Europe, yeah, well, Eastern Europe was all, yes.
Secession movements have come out of communism. So why is America falling over itself to turn into communists again? I mean,
Well, that's a good question, isn't it?
what's the logic there? Or what are they after?
There isn't a logic. I think what's basically taken place is that Red China has bought up a lot of corporate America. And it certainly seems to have bought up the present resident of the White House. He seems to be a puppet for Communist Party of China. And,
So the Soviets didn't do it right, they didn't do communism the right way.
but we're going to do it right. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just thinking in terms of how you actually implement it. Is it not the best way to first go about the macro issues? Like, we need to control our railways. We need to, where's our money coming from? Do we have our own monetary system? All the big things, like the power grid. Before, that would give us 10 years to work through that. To get into tiny, we want Sharia law here and this law here. Is it not best to tackle it from the biggest issues down to the smallest issues first?
The main thing is to keep the main thing. So focusing on the big issues. I mean, like freedom in the economy. So Stephen Mitford Goodson had the emphasis, as someone who's once director of the Southern Reserve Bank, that the biggest problem is economic. And if you can get the government out of the economic bondage of the as he said, History of Central Banking and Slavery of Mankind, that book documented that the system of usury, of interest charging of the banks, is one of the worst things in all of society, which forces unrealistic taxation, which forces mothers out of being homemakers into the workplace to pay all the extra taxes that are required for this big daddy government that's nanny state. And so the whole thing is, if we can get out of the usury of the banks, we will already be in a situation that's a lot better. And to bring taxes down to under 1% is going to provide tremendous incentive for investment, for job creators, for employers, which will solve the unemployment problem and the welfare problem and all these other things. So he looks at it from an economic point of view. Now, I'm not an economist, so I'm quite impressed that there's so many things that will apparently be solved by good economics. And the basis of that is, as Stephen Goodson says, 60 times in the Bible there are passages forbidding usury, charging of interest with loans. And when you think that that's the main emphasis of Magna Carta as well, and this has been forgotten, and we've allowed phenomenal usury. You just think the average student, the average person spends something like 15 to 20 years after they graduate from college paying off their student debt. That's not just bondage, that's slavery. And it's crippling so much of the economy. You think of those people, their kids are going into university by the time they're paying off their own student debt, and now starting their children's student debt. This is insane. So our society is debt built upon debt, and there's some people becoming billionaires. One thing that should shock all of us, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in his Children's Health Defense just put on his website, this COVID vaccine nonsense has caused 9 new billionaires. There are 9 people who are new billionaires to the world as a result of the vaccines. Now, how can, when so many lives have been destroyed, so many families and businesses are destroyed, how did a whole lot of people become billionaires out of a vaccine? Is this about saving life? Or is this about making some people obscenely wealthy at the expense of poor people who've been crushed? 9 new billionaires in the world because of this vaccine promotion. You think when you say everyone in the world has got to get this vaccine, do you know that, again, this is coming from Robert F. Kennedy's Children's Health Defense website, that the US government has paid, I've forgotten the exact numbers, but it's multiplied billions for the vaccines, out of taxpayers' money, of course. And now they're paying another $2 billion, now that's US dollars, not Zimbabwe dollars, $2 billion to market the necessity of getting the vaccines to those who are part of what they call vaccine hesitancy. I just like the term vaccine hesitancy. It suggests that, like you're standing on a diving board in a pool and you're hesitating to dive in. You will dive in, but you're just hesitating. Or like the first time I did parachuting, you stand at the door and you hesitate. You will jump. In fact, got a boot in the back, so I didn't have a choice. But there's this hesitancy. So none of us are, I'm not hesitant. I mean, there's nothing, are you hesitant about the vaccine? I'm 100% decided. No, they can ice skate in hell before I'll think about taking the vaccine. So there's no hesitancy, but they're calling us to overcome vaccine hesitancy. $2 billion. $2 billion. Do you want to work that out in rand? Billion with a B. If this vaccine is so good, why do they need to put so much money into brainwashing people to get it? And then, of course, incentivizing and then threatening. And
the reason I mentioned the economics is that I don't think many people are aware just how powerful corporations are. That many of these corporations are more powerful than average countries. They have more money than average country.
Yes.
If you actually
Yes.
think about that,
Yes.
really think about that.
That's
They're
true.
actually running us, not the ANC.
Yes, basically what you've got to understand is there's big tech, like Google, there's big government, like UN, and non-governmental organizations like World Health Organization, the Wuhan Health Organization. So there's big tech, there's big government, there's big pharma. And they are working they're in bed with one another. It's an incestuous relationship. When you look at the relationship between big tech, big pharma, and big government, they are running the whole show. So yes, when you say corporate, and then you find out from people like Professor Anthony Sutton that Wall Street bankrolled the Bolshevik Revolution, and he wrote books like not only Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, but The Best Enemy Money Can Buy. How much billions of dollars America paid every year to bolster the Soviet Union and Red China. Best enemy money can buy. It's just beyond comprehension. If people just understand a lot of this treachery. And then you've got these people out there who really believe the government wants what's good for you. So the real conspiracy theorists are those who believe that the government cares about you, that the media would never lie to you, and a big pharma who makes billions off your sickness wants to cure you and make you healthy. I mean,
Media is another question as well. We're up against a juggernaut. I mean, you showed those examples and they're brilliant. I mean, I didn't hear about them all because the media don't like to show us those examples. And they must understand that they've given this, they obviously don't like secession.
no.
So every single solitary, they're all going to sing from the same hymn sheet. It's going to be this very cynical outlook on a cake party. Oh, they're going to. So we are up against it. We have to also identify. I don't know how we overcome that because I see it's very difficult.
Yeah, well, of course, the thing is, when you talk to almost anything about it, they're all pre-programmed to say, the ANC would never allow it. It could never happen. Well, the Soviet Union would never allow Latvia and Lithuania and Ukraine and so on to go free either. But it still happened. Yugoslavia would never allow Slovenia and Croatia. It doesn't matter that they wouldn't allow, it still happened. And it isn't up to, like you could have said back in 1980s, National Party would never allow the ANC to be unbanned or to become government. I'm sure they wouldn't have wanted to, but not everything happens the way you like. So they don't have power over everything. The ANC is not omniscient or omnipotent. And if they can't keep the water flowing, they can't pay the bills, and if they can't keep the lights on, what makes you think they can stop the people of the Western Cape saying, no thank you, bye? No. Yes?
Just getting back to the comments about the involvement of big tech in government, so those who run scheme making. Do you think they would, a company like Amazon, for instance, would they get behind tech independence, or would they?
Amazon?
Yeah, so they're building a new headquarters in the Cape.
I don't think so. I think Amazon is lock, stock, leftist. Yeah. Even though an entire Amazon warehouse was burned down by BLM, they give millions to BLM. They support them. Yeah, so even though they burned down their own warehouse.
I'm using them as an example, but just big businesses, international, multinational companies, would they be supportive of something?
No, I don't think so. I think the big business and the big government, the big tech, are all in bed together, along with big pharma. So no, I don't think so. Notice what happened during lockdown. Instead of locking up Macro and Pick and Pay and letting the corner shops operate, they closed down all the small shops and only let the big ones operate. That's typical, because the lockdown didn't hurt Macro or Pick and Pay or Checkers, did it? But it sure hurt the average farmer and the average business out there.
Yes, the follow-up question then is just that low taxation, it's the fuel system. I mean, what companies is it, encouraging to come? So if you're in a situation where your large multinationals are actually quite comfortable, making money as they are.
Yes.
The sort of value that I see with the taxation, for instance, you mentioned Singapore, but I just wonder, will it have the effect of attracting this?
Yes, I think it will. Hong Kong, Singapore, tax havens flourish. Now, maybe not flourish for the big tech, but it sure flourishes for a lot of entrepreneurs. That's what we want, entrepreneurs. And we don't, I'm trying consciously to support small businesses, Cape businesses, people who support Cape independence, to try and not waste the precious little resource we have on funding the big, fat, in bed with the evil government bunch of people. So unfortunately, often we do it because of convenience, but if we can get more strategic about where we invest our, just whether it's our groceries on, if we can be supporting local farmers who are producing this or that product and this service, it's so much better if we can just think. That's one of the things for independence, but again, we're getting into things that are coming in next week's presentation. We've been going quite long. I need to wrap this up, and then we can have more tea and all that.
A lot of these countries that you use as examples, they got independence, but now they've taken that big step backwards and they've locked themselves into the EU, for instance. Would we stay out of the African Union?
Well, the African Union at this moment is just a talking place. It isn't a common currency like European Union has gotten with the euro and so on. So I don't know if the African Union at this stage poses a real threat to us. At one stage, the African Union was talking about an African Union president, and Thabo Mbeki thought he'd be the first, and Gaddafi and him were sort of jostling for the position, and they both sort of lost their positions. But no, fortunately, I think the AU is not anywhere close to the EU's rebuilding Babylon. They're still just talking. I don't know that they're not enforcing anything yet. If the AU ever became something centralized, then I think we'd have to pull out. But at the moment, if we were allowed to have a representation for the Cape there, be a nice opportunity to witness. There's a lot of other emerging states. There's a group that we're already affiliated with called the Secession of Emerging States. And that's other groups working for independence around the world. And there's groups in Africa that are working for secession, like Biafra and so on. So we obviously have to be sympathetic to them. No, fortunately, we can praise God the AU is nowhere near organized as they would like to be. They were talking about a United States of Africa. I mean, that was a vision of Thabo Mbeki and Gaddafi, but thankfully that has failed.
And then the other thing is, you see these contrasts between Singapore and, say, Switzerland. While Singapore might have a fantastic economy and all that, I certainly hope we don't turn into a concrete jungle like that, that we preserve a wholesome...
True, but having said that, there's no graffiti in Singapore.
Yeah, but just hopefully we have those
yes.
humane scale...
They've got a very, very small...
Yeah.
It's a tiny island. For example, I believe that on their freeways, they've got the dividing things are movable concrete flower boxes. Because in the event of war, they've got to be able to move them out the way so it can become landing strips and things like this. So there's all kinds of things when you're short of space. Holland's also like that, but they've got phenomenal amounts of preparation for what to do in the case of an emergency because land is so scarce and a lot of their land's underwater. Well, Singapore is an extraordinary country. But anyway, the thing is we should take something good from the best and choose what suits our purpose, and I think the Cape could become a phenomenal country. Some people talk about making Cape Town the Monaco of Africa. Now, Monaco is a very successful little Riviera, independent country. Just many people think it should be part of France, but Monaco is its own country. Well, we're a lot bigger than that. Do you know that the Western Cape is bigger than England? We've got a bigger population than Namibia. We've got a far bigger economy than Namibia. When you look at size, then you start looking at things like Singapore and Hong Kong. Honestly, it's not about the size. The Western Cape is big enough to be a great country. And we've got enough people, we've got enough natural resources, we've got nuclear power station. Then we have people talking about the power of the waves, that we can have ocean energy. There's so much around here that we can use. We can become a really green state. In the best sense of the word, an environmental treasure house. And it's just such a pity we've been held back by a bunch of, well, I'd say dinosaur, but that would be an insult to dinosaurs, a bunch of Marxist Leninists who are stuck in the last century, worst ideas of Karl Marx and Lenin, and they haven't woken up to the 21st century and what we should be doing now. So there's a lot of things I think we can do different, better in the Cape, but we can only do it if we're free and independent.